Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I've always been the black sheep in my family when it comes to self-expression. While they prefer to keep things proper and traditional, I've always been drawn to art in all its forms. For years, I've been planning this beautiful piece, a watercolor-style phoenix rising from ashes, symbolizing my journey through some really tough times in my early 20s when I struggled with depression but came out stronger. I saved up for months, researched artists, and finally found the perfect one who specialized in watercolor tattoos. The day finally arrived, and after 6 hours under the needle, I had this gorgeous piece that meant the world to me. Despite knowing my family's stance on tattoos, I was so proud of it that I decided to share it in our family group chat. Big mistake. My mother, who has this special talent for turning any moment of joy into drama, immediately messaged me demanding to know how much the tattoo cost and told me to send her money. I was instantly irritated. 3 days ago, I needed some cash for a local art fair where some vendors didn't take cards. My mom happened to have cash on hand, so she gave me $200 and I immediately transferred it back to her account. I even showed her the confirmation screen at the time. I politely reminded her that I had already transferred the money to her account 3 days ago and suggested she check her banking app. She left me on red. Classic mom move. I was annoyed but tried to let it go. About an hour later, she started messaging me again. She sent multiple messages asking how to log into my Apple TV. She complained that the password wasn't working and kept asking if I was there, explaining she was trying to watch the show I had recommended. Last week, I had given her my Apple TV login because she wanted to watch this new psychological thriller series I've been raving about. It's one of those shows that hooks you in the first episode. There's this massive twist about 15 minutes in that just grabs you and doesn't let go. I stared at her messages, still salty about her earlier attitude. Then a deliciously petty idea formed in my head. I decided not to respond. I opened my Apple TV app and sure enough, I could see she had finally managed to log in and was streaming the show. I waited and waited, just long enough for her to get to that incredible twist, that moment where everything you think you know gets turned upside down. Then, with a smile that would make the Grinch proud, I logged into my account settings, changed my password, and forced a log out on all devices. The reaction was immediate and explosive. She frantically messaged me, saying the show had stopped working. She kept asking what happened to the TV and insisted it wasn't funny, complaining that she was in the middle of something important. The messages kept coming through every possible platform: text, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger, even email. She was absolutely losing it, and I was living for it. I made sure to stay offline on all platforms, letting her think I was sleeping. Her messages got increasingly angry. She called me childish and accused me of doing this on purpose. She even tried to threaten me about what would happen next time she saw me, calling me disrespectful. After about an hour of continuous messages, she finally gave in. She sent a message apologizing, admitting she had found the bank transfer, and pleaded with me to give her the new password because she desperately needed to know what happened next in the show. I waited another 30 minutes, just to let her stew a bit more before finally responding. I played innocent, pretending I had just woken up and cheerfully agreed to send her the new password. I couldn't resist adding a subtle dig about checking her bank account before accusing me of not paying her back next time, complete with a smiley face emoji. She didn't respond to that, but I did give her the new password. The next day in the family group chat, she actually posted an apology for jumping to conclusions. It wasn't much, but coming from her, it was practically a miracle. She's now completely hooked on the show, which means she'll think twice before being nasty to me, at least until she finishes the season. I'm a police officer in a small town where everyone pretty much knows everyone. After a particularly rough week of night shifts, I decided to treat my grandmother to lunch at her favorite local diner. She's been living alone since my grandfather passed away last year and our weekly lunch dates have become our special tradition. The diner is nothing fancy, just your typical small town establishment with checkered floors and vinyl booths. My grandmother loves it because they serve the best meatloaf in town, and she's been a regular there for over 30 years. She always sits at the same corner booth because it's closer to the restroom and easier for her to walk to with her arthritis. That day, I was running a few minutes late because I had to file some last-minute paperwork. I texted my grandmother to go ahead and get seated, and I'd join her shortly. Little did I know what I was about to walk into. I pulled into the parking lot and was about to head inside when I heard raised voices coming from within the diner. Through the window, I could see some commotion at my grandmother's usual corner booth. I quickened my pace, and as I opened the door I could hear the argument unfolding. Karen was yelling at my grandmother, saying she didn't care how long she'd been coming to the diner because this was her table, insisting that she always sat there with her friends for Thursday lunch. My grandmother calmly tried to explain that she was waiting for her grandson and that it was difficult for her to move around, suggesting that Karen could sit at another table for today. Karen then started bragging about being the president of the local business association and how she brings important clients to the diner. The waitress tried to intervene, telling Karen that there were plenty of other tables available, but Karen refused, demanding that particular table and claiming everyone knew it was hers. I was already moving through the diner when I saw something that made my blood boil. This woman, dressed in an expensive-looking business suit, actually grabbed my grandmother's arm and started trying to pull her out of the booth. She was screaming that if my grandmother wouldn't move, she'd make her move. My grandmother let out a frightened yelp, and that was all I needed to see. I covered the remaining distance in 3 quick strides, and in one smooth motion, thank you, police training, I had the woman's arm twisted behind her back and her face pressed against the floor. The movement was practiced and controlled, enough to subdue but not to harm. I announced myself as a police officer and told her she was under arrest for assault. Karen started struggling and yelling about who she was, claiming that I was assaulting her. I began reading her Miranda rights, telling her she had the right to remain silent and the right to an attorney. The look on her face when I pulled out my off-duty cuffs was insane, but it got even better when I helped my grandmother up and checked if she was okay. My grandmother assured me she was fine, just a bit shaken. Karen's face went from red to pale in seconds when she realized the connection. She stammered out a question about whether the woman was really my grandmother. I confirmed it and told her that she had just committed assault against an elderly person, which was a felony in our state. The diner had gone completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. The woman's friends who had been standing nearby this whole time suddenly seemed very interested in their shoes. Karen started backpedaling, trying to claim it was all a misunderstanding. I told her she could explain that to the officers who were on their way. Within minutes, my colleagues arrived. I had texted them right after cuffing her. They took her away while she alternated between crying and threatening to sue everyone. The diner's owner came over and insisted our lunch was on the house. Turns out, contrary to what the woman had claimed, she'd only been coming to the diner for about 6 months, and she'd been rude to the staff every single time. The owner had actually been looking for a reason to ban her, and well, assault certainly gave him one. My grandmother and I eventually got to enjoy our lunch, though she insisted on moving to a different booth because she didn't want to cause any more trouble. I reminded her that she hadn't caused anything. Some people just think the world revolves around them. Later that day, I found out that the woman had recently moved to our town from the city and had been throwing her weight around, trying to establish herself as some sort of local big shot. She'd been making enemies left and right with her entitled attitude. She was charged with assault, and despite her threats about knowing important people, the security cameras had caught everything. She ended up pleading guilty to avoid a harsher sentence. The judge, who happens to be a regular at the diner himself, made sure to include community service at the local senior center as part of her sentence. These days, whenever my grandmother and I have our weekly lunch, we sit at her table, and nobody gives us any trouble. Sometimes we catch the waitresses grinning when they walk past, probably remembering the day the entitled president of the local business association learned that some tables come with unexpected consequences. As a hockey card collector for the past 15 years, my daily routine includes stopping at Tim Hortons before heading to my job at the local library. It's not just about the caffeine fix, it's about those hockey cards. My collection started when I was a kid watching games with my dad, and now it's grown into something of an obsession. Every morning I tell myself just one more pack, but we collectors know how that goes. That one morning was different. I just finished a night shift filling in for a coworker, and I was running on empty. The drive-through line was longer than usual, but I needed that tea and, let's be honest, those cards. After a 15-minute wait, I finally pulled up to the speaker. I started to order my extra-large tea with 2 milk, but before I could finish, the drive-through worker curtly told me to drive up. I paused for a moment, fingers still hovering over the call button. Now, I've been coming here long enough to know that's not how it usually goes. But after a 12-hour shift of dealing with entitled library patrons who thought late fees were optional, I wasn't in the mood for another confrontation. So I did what they asked. I drove up. The window slid open, and a young worker with obvious disdain plastered across their face thrust the debit machine at me. They told me my total was $2.15. I explained that I wasn't finished with my order and asked for a Boston cream donut and a pack of hockey cards. Their eye roll was so dramatic I thought they might strain something. They told me, rather rudely, that I needed to complete my order at the speaker and complained that now they'd have to void the transaction and re-enter everything. I pointed out that I had tried to finish my order but was told to drive up. They denied telling me to drive up at all. When I insisted that I barely gotten to mention 2 milk before being cut off, they stubbornly claimed that wasn't how they did things there. At this point, another worker, clearly a supervisor, approached the window and asked if there was a problem. The drive-through worker quickly complained that I hadn't completed my order at the speaker and was now trying to add items. I explained the situation to the supervisor, telling them how their colleague had interrupted my order and told me to drive up when I was trying to order tea, a donut, and hockey cards, only getting as far as the tea before being cut off. The supervisor's expression shifted from mild annoyance to understanding. They asked the drive-through worker if they were the one taking orders just then, and the worker nodded, suddenly less confident. The supervisor mentioned that they'd discussed this before and that this was the 3rd complaint this week about cutting customers off. The worker's face turned red, and they mumbled something under their breath. The supervisor apologized for the inconvenience and confirmed my order of an extra-large tea with 2 milk, a Boston cream donut, and hockey cards. I confirmed this was correct. The supervisor took over the transaction, and while they were gathering my items, I could hear them quietly but explaining proper drive-through protocol to the worker. They gave me an extra pack of hockey cards to make up for the trouble. When I pulled away with my tea, donut, and not 1 but 2 packs of cards, I caught a glimpse of the drive-through worker in my rearview mirror, getting what appeared to be quite the lecture. The morning shift supervisor was gesturing at the drive-through headset while the worker stood there, arms crossed, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. I opened my first pack of cards while waiting at the red light. A mint-condition rookie card slid out, one I've been hunting for months. Sometimes karma works in mysterious ways, and today it worked through hockey cards. The next day I noticed a different voice at the drive-through speaker, one that let me finish my entire order without interruption. I've been back every morning since, and while I occasionally see that same worker inside, they're no longer working the drive-through. I guess some people aren't cut out for Canadian hospitality, especially at a place that's practically a national institution. My story starts with the house I co-own with my mother, where my entitled younger brother had been living with us. He's 26, 5 years younger than me, and has never learned what responsibility means. My mother finally reached her breaking point and told him he had until May to move out. I was counting down the days, but what happened next made me snap much sooner than expected. It was late at night, and I was already in bed when my brother barged into my room. He announced that he was taking my dog for 3 days on his fishing trip. When I told him there was absolutely no way he could take my dog anywhere, He responded arrogantly that he wasn't asking me. He was telling me. He claimed the dog was his too and that he could take him whenever he wanted. Let me give you some background about my dog. 9 years ago, my brother demanded we get a dog. I begged my mother not to cave because he had already proven himself irresponsible with his previous dog, which my mother had to rehome due to his neglect. But of course, she gave in, and history repeated itself. My brother never cared for the new dog. I ended up taking over everything. Vet bills, feeding, grooming, you name it. When we had to temporarily move in with relatives who didn't allow pets, guess who had to find the dog a foster home? Me. I visited him every day after my college classes and brought him back as soon as we had our own place again. When I briefly moved out for a year, my dog came with me. He's now 10 years old, has arthritis, needs regular medication for his hips and stomach, and absolutely hates water. My brother's response to my protests was infuriating. He dismissively told me to just give him everything the dog needed. Then he had the nerve to say he could have just taken the dog and let me panic, but he was being nice by telling me ahead of time. That statement sent chills down my spine. Without hesitation, I grabbed my purse, put on my slippers, and told my dog to get in the car. We drove straight to my fiance's house and spent the night there. The text messages started flooding in immediately. My brother called me a monster and claimed he had even paid extra for the dog to stay at the Airbnb. What made this amusing was that I had spoken to his father recently, who mentioned my brother wasn't paying for anything on the trip because he claimed he had no money. So I responded by telling him to show me the receipt and I'd happily reimburse him. This was satisfying because "show me the receipt" was his favorite phrase whenever our mother asked him to pay his share of the bills. The next few weeks were a circus. My brother kept demanding to know where his dog was, despite never helping with his care. He even threatened that I probably wouldn't bring the dog back because I was afraid he'd do the same thing to me. When I didn't respond, he ominously declared that if I wouldn't tell him where the dog was, he would find out himself. These threats only confirmed I'd made the right decision. I ended up moving in with my fiancé permanently much earlier than planned. My dog adjusted beautifully to his new life with my fiancé's 2 German shepherds, and watching him enjoy running around the huge yard made my heart full. The story doesn't end there though. My brother's entitlement reached new heights when our aunt needed help with something important. She asked him to send me some information to complete a task for her. Despite multiple reminders, he refused, saying I needed to apologize for being rude first. I pretended to give up and had our cousin contact him instead. He sent the information immediately, not knowing it would be forwarded to me. My brother didn't move out until late July, 2 months past his deadline. He spent his last days alternating between giving our mother the silent treatment, blaming her for ruining his life, and throwing pity parties about being depressed. But on moving day, he pulled his final manipulation tactic. Through tears, he apologized for everything, claiming all he wanted was to be loved by his mom and sister. He even asked what we would do if he killed himself. My mother chose to believe this was a genuine change of heart. I saw it differently. He was just trying to maintain his safety net. He now lives with 3 roommates across town and, according to family gossip, is realizing how good he had it at our house. 6 months after leaving with my dog that night, I'm married to my fiancé, and we own our first home. My dog spends his days sunbathing in our yard, playing with his German Shepherd siblings, and living his best life. My brother doesn't have our address, and our relatives know better than to share it. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.